Oh, hi. Can you hear me? All good? All right. Well, hi, Ben. I understand you're from Australia, so it's an honor to be able to talk to you. Now, I'm going to go right into some of the issues that we have here as we discuss the topic of budget should be cut for Planned Parenthood. Now, I'm going to focus specifically on the United States federal government since they are the primary organization that is funding Planned Parenthood. According to Planned Parenthood's most recent statistics, they are receiving $554 million from the United States federal government. And the majority of that is the money that I believe should be cut from Planned Parenthood. Now, I have three reasons that I believe this should happen. The first one is the fundamental issue of the abortion discussion, which is that abortion kills a human being. Now, Planned Parenthood, the link here is that Planned Parenthood is the largest provider of abortions in the United States of America, one of the largest in the world, I believe. And in fact, they are accountable for 35% of all abortions inside of the United States. Now, the brink here is that abortion ends the life of a human being. Now, we know this because there is evidence of when life begins. The book Pathology of the Fetus and the Infant explains, quote, "Every time a sperm cell and ovum unites, a new being is created, which is alive." The 1981 official Senate report found so much evidence agreeing with that fact that they were able to say, quote, "Scientists agree that conception marks the beginning of life. There is overwhelming agreement on this point in countless scientific writings." So ultimately, if there is a life in the mother's womb, then abortion, which ends that life, would be killing a human being. So there is no reason for us to be funding an organization that kills human life. Now, the second reason that I believe that we must stop funding Planned Parenthood is that funding it is abusive. Now, the main point under this is the Hyde Amendment. The United States has passed the Hyde Amendment, which says that any organization that funds abortion should not receive federal taxpayer dollars. And the reason for that is because it is abusive to the taxpayers who might have a vehement disagreement with what Planned Parenthood does. And so it is unfair and abusive to take their taxpayer dollars and give it to an organization that does the opposite of what they believe. Now, the third argument that I have here is that there is a better solution. And this is that we can take the money that we are currently giving to Planned Parenthood and we can redistribute it to federally qualified health organizations that do not provide abortions. It is simply better because it is morally better. They can provide specific, focused care to these women, and there's no reason to be focused on hurting human life when we have a much better option.
All right. Hey, how you going? Pleasure to speak to you as well. Okay, so I'll just go through your case quickly. So the first part of your case was basically that we shouldn't fund them because they provide abortions. The first thing I'd say here is that this is a separation of powers issue, because if you didn't want them to provide abortions, you should just pass a law which says this organization is not allowed to fund abortions or make abortion illegal. At the moment, you have the Supreme Court, which has already ruled on this. You have Roe v. Wade. It's been declared a right. So it'd be really weird for the federal government to use like funding to bully organizations into like breaking into, doing something which is legal. So if you don't want abortions to happen, fine. I'm not going to argue whether it's right or wrong or not, but this is the wrong way to do it. So that's the first thing. You should just either there are lots of ways you could do that. You could one, fight the Supreme Court on it, try and get Roe v. Wade appealed. That would be legal. Secondly, you could make abortion illegal. You could make abortion illegal. I'm not like deeply confident in how the US system works, but in Australia we would have like a referendum or something to do it the proper way. The idea that you would defund an organization which provides it is deeply a weird way to do it, because it's just kind of like saying we don't actually want to have the democratic conversation. We don't actually want to pass the law. We just want to, shut down organizations which don't. And I worry about the precedent this sets, by the way, as to, does this mean that in future organizations so the government can overturn the democratic process by simply defunding in budget bills organizations which are politically not on their side, as opposed to actually trying to fight it in the court of law or fight it democratically. Second thing you said is that you shouldn't put the funds there because they take life away in the form of abortions. I also think this is a problem because prisons take life away, but that doesn't mean we should defund prisons, right? Lots of organizations, and unfortunately, sometimes do things which take life away. That's not a reason to defund them, because they have many other core processes and functions, like women's health more broadly, which are more important. and constitute far of what they do. I'm sure you know that abortion is only 3% of what Planned Parenthood does. The rest of it is standard things which we can agree are good, like mammograms, which I assume you support because you want the funds to be reallocated other places. Third thing you talked about was the Hyde Amendment. I think you've got the logic of the Hyde Amendment wrong. You said it was that no organization which provides abortion should receive funds. That's not true, because if that was true, they'd be in violation of the Hyde Amendment right now. What it actually is that none of the funds given under the Hyde Amendment funding can go to abortion, and they are currently complying with that law. No federal funds go to abortion, which makes the logic of this case even more deeply confusing. Because to stop an organization from providing abortions, you're taking away funds which by law can't go to the abortions. So that's a bit strange. The last thing as well is that you said that we should put the money elsewhere in other organizations. I just think it's simplistic. Planned Parenthood has infrastructure and recognition as an open channel for you know about, like, for example, economies of scale. It's everywhere already. The amount of money which would be wasted in things like overhead to set up all these new organizations would make it worse.
Okay, so I'm going to go through a couple of points you put up there. You stated that if I have an issue with abortion, then we should pass a law to stop abortion. We should take a different solution rather than defunding Planned Parenthood. Well, actually, I'm going to refer you back to the Hyde Amendment here. You correctly pointed out that the Hyde Amendment is supposed to stop anyone from using money for abortions. That is correct. So we already have a law which is intended to do that. I'm not advocating in this specific case that we outlaw abortions. However, as a rationale for removing funding from an organization, it would be that that organization is providing a service which has been agreed to be an issue that we do not want taxpayers to be funding. So the rationale for that was the fact that abortion is killing someone, which is why we had the Hyde Amendment in the first place. Now, you didn't actually respond to any of the arguments within it about how, in fact, it is taking a life. Now, the second response I have here is that I'm not going to say it, never mind. You then went down and you talked about how the prisons also take life away. Now, this is true. Prisons, people do wind up having their lives taken away by prisons. However, the difference is we're talking about the moral issue of whether or not it's acceptable to kill. With this issue, we are talking about abortion, which has killed someone. The reason we would take away funding from Planned Parenthood is because it is specifically killing. Now, you also pointed out that there was the 3% number that Planned Parenthood has provided about how much they provide for abortions versus other things. This is inaccurate. Actually, Planned Parenthood is significantly more focused on other issues than on, you mentioned mammograms. There is not one mammogram that is provided by Planned Parenthood. They provide 1.2% of breast cancer screenings compared to the rest of the world. And in fact, they provide 35% of abortions. The vast majority of their services are abortions. In fact, they've cooked the numbers on this. If you take a look at studies like from the Guttmacher Institute, you will find that, in fact, the only reason they come up with their numbers of 3% is because they're counting every single condom, every single consultation, every single small thing that they do, they count it as part of that. And then they include everything about abortion into one. Whereas in reality, 43% of the people who come through their doors are being provided abortions. The vast majority of their services winds up going towards abortions. For every one person who is provided with an adoption referral, 200 will be given abortions. It is a vastly focused issue towards abortions. And your only response to my point that we have a better solution is that it's too simplistic. Well, just because it's too simplistic doesn't mean it's wrong. It's more localized, better care.
Okay, so the first thing, I think there's a major principle tension in your case when you said that you don't want to outlaw abortions. If you think it's life, and if you think taking it is murder, you want it to be against the law. Like, it's super strange. And again, let me say it once more. Even if you don't think that's possible, defunding organizations which provide it is doubly the wrong thing to do. You should just pass a law which says they aren't allowed to provide them anymore instead of defunding them. Because you don't dispute that the other things they do are good. Like you cite some, anti-abortion group statistics. Like, let me point out how misleading the statistic is. They provide 1.2% of what you said of other medical services compared to the rest of the world. Well, yeah, because the rest of the world combined versus one organization in America is obviously going to outnumber them in all medical services. But the other things they do are important. Like, you say, every condom given out. Well, every condom given out, everything of birth control is potentially something which doesn't have to result in an abortion because they're having safe sex. So if you want less abortions, that is a good thing for you. You want birth control to be given out. And I don't think it's I don't think it's disputable that Planned Parenthood provides a lot of these services. Like, okay, so basically what that means is that here are the steps you should take. Either 1, try and get Roe v. Wade overturned. 2, pass a law in the thing which says they aren't allowed to provide abortions anymore and keep their funding going. The funding which you are cutting will not stop them from providing abortions because that funding is already not going towards abortions, right? So if anything, you've actually stripped away everything except the thing which you want to interrupt. So the thing you're proposing doesn't work. It doesn't do anything. Okay, so the other thing as well with the Hyde Amendment is that, again, they're not in violation of the Hyde Amendment because they're just following the law already. Here's what I'm going to bring out in some substantive case. I think that what this does is it is a overreach of the government to start using budgetary bills to evade normal democratic processes. It is a separation of powers issue because they are trying to use people's they try to use price signals on people's financial circumstances to bully them into following laws that they haven't been able to pass yet. Abortion is currently legal in the United States. If you disagree with it, overturn Roe v. Wade, pass a law to get rid of it. Don't say because we can't do that, we have to resort to usurping people's democratic will, and instead we're going to financially bully people out of it. Which is, again, what's quite odd, because you're saying, oh, well, the real problem is taxpayers' dollars are going towards it. Which really just means the problem is that people who can't afford it themselves. Does that mean that it's okay for you if someone who can afford an abortion or someone who has health insurance should be able to do it? Is that okay? Because if it's not okay, then what you admit is that this model, this idea, doesn't actually do what you want it to do. It just stops a certain portion of the public from accessing abortions, even though your own logic would say that all of them are immoral.
All right. Now you started out by pointing out that if I want to be against it, that we were focused on the amount that they give versus what the world offers. That wasn't actually the numbers that I was citing. I was citing numbers of how much Planned Parenthood contributes to women in the United States versus how much the rest of the organizations in the United States contribute to the same things. Planned Parenthood does not offer mammograms. Planned Parenthood actually only offers, compared to the other institutes in the United States, the other organizations that help women, less than 2% of women's cancer screenings, but over 30% of the total abortions. They abort 160 children for every one they refer for adoption. They only provide 0.97% of Pap tests, 1.8% of clinical breast exams. They are entirely focused on abortion. So this is an abortion issue that we're talking about here. Now, and that was all according to studies by the Charlotte Lozier Institute, as well as numbers that were provided by Planned Parenthood's own annual report. We were simply looking at the numbers of all the institutes who can offer these things in the United States versus the numbers that Planned Parenthood themselves in their annual report says they do. Now, you stated that the money is not going to abortions. This is incorrect because it's simply an accounting twist. Because if I gave money to the KKK, but said, this is only for your home improvement projects, well, we all know what it's going to do because you free up money to use for other things. Now, you still haven't responded to the fact that abortion does take human life, that it is killing, the fact that science has already accepted the fact that this is killing. If there are organizations who we should be focused on, they should be the organizations that do not provide such services. We can still help women. We can still provide the services that are so important. And yet we don't need to do it through an organization that provides for abortions, which are killing. Now, you stated finally that there is an overreach of government that I am advocating here. Actually, I would say this is a term. I would say the overreach of government is that government is taking taxpayer money from the citizens and then giving it to an organization who they completely disagree with. At least half of the country disagrees with Planned Parenthood. That is taking their money and then using it against them. A much better solution, if you are so certain to have Planned Parenthood, would be to have private citizens offer money to Planned Parenthood. We see these all the time. We see people who have drives for Planned Parenthood. If we want to talk about an overreach of government, that is on the government who takes money from the citizens and forces the citizens' money to be used for an organization they disagree with.
Okay. The first thing I'm going to address is that you keep saying that I have not responded to the abortion is life issue. I have, just not in the way you're expecting, because you expected to get this into a debate about abortion. The way I've responded to it, which you actually haven't addressed, is that whether abortions are life or not is a very contentious issue with no clear answer, which a lot of people, you said at least half of America agrees they are, and that means the other half agrees they aren't. In that environment, I think the people deciding should be the existing democratic processes which everyone agrees on, right? Like having separation of powers, like having a legislature and a Senate and a Supreme Court, which means that these sorts of things, which are rights, can't be overridden by a particular government, which means that if the government wants to do that, like in Australia, we have to have a referendum, for example. I'm not exactly sure what the process is in the US, but all I'm saying is, if you don't want abortion, right, you've in your own stat, you just said that they provide 12% of all abortions. Why take this insane move to potentially reduce the amount of abortions which you think are murder by 12%? Because, you know, like that means that the other 78% of them are still happening. What you want to do, if you want to get rid of abortions, is either, and again, this is a much simpler scenario because you don't have to rely on Planned Parenthood responding in the funding way which you think they will. Just pass a law which says they're not allowed to do it anymore. Why not that? That's much better, right? Because it doesn't require their budgeteers to say, well, we can't afford to do this anymore. It just makes it illegal, period. So that is a better solution if you want it. But the solution you actually want, which is why you're proposing it, is that you know that that won't pass. You know that you can't get it because the Supreme Court has already done it, has already instituted it as a right, which then leaves you in the position where either A, you have to say, well, look, we acknowledge this is a right, but we want to violate that right financially. We want to financially coerce people into a violation of their rights, which is a huge overreach of government power and not one which I would be happy with in any other circumstance. Or B, you have to say, well, we'll just defund the organization and we'll lose out on everything else they do. So not a good solution. Okay. Second thing about freeing up money is that's just you kind of relying on Planned Parenthood responding with their budget in the way which you predict. What if they just keep doing the abortions, right? What if some of the groups donating to them, for example, are pro-abortion groups who are donating to them only for them to provide abortions, right? So that means that money isn't taking away from abortions. They will continue to do that. You will just strip them of their capacity to do everything else. Now, you kept saying things like, oh, they only do 1% of all the mammograms, or 1% of all the pap smears, or 1% of all the condoms, or whatever. Look, I linked me to the institute. I looked it up on Google. Can't find a trace of this institute. But even if it is 1% of the American population is like a lot of people, you know, and it's not that easy to just reallocate that to organizations which.
All right, I think there's a fundamental issue that we have to address here, which is that Planned Parenthood does not have a right to taxpayer dollars. No organization, no 501c3 or 501c4 has a right to taxpayer dollars. That is a gift that we either choose or don't choose to offer to them. You're acting like this is a government overreach. It's completely the opposite. We either have the option of giving money to them or not. So then it becomes, is it a positive option to give it to them or not? And that is why I focused on the fact that it is not a positive option, because they are taking human life. Also because we have much better solutions in the federally qualified healthcare centers who can offer the same care, oftentimes better, and there are 20 of them for every one Planned Parenthood. It is a much better solution that is more morally useful. It is actually taking away from the government overreach that you're talking about. Now, you asked why we can't make a law against abortion, because ultimately you're correct. I would, in term, like that. Well, the answer is simply because of political capital. With politics, certain things are politically possible and certain things are not. So this would be simply a stepping stone. Or it can be an end solution. Doesn't really matter. The point is the plan better right now or not? And the answer is yes. If we remove funding from Planned Parenthood, that is both morally advantageous and provides better services for women, because we redistribute the federal funds to organizations that can actually provide the services that you're talking about. Now, you were talking about the numbers on this. Even if it's only 1%, sure, yeah. I mean, I get that 1% is a large amount. And yet my point is not that we should just cut 1% of women's health. Not at all. I think we should take that 1% away from an organization that is hurting human life and provide the same services to organizations that don't, who can actually provide better service, better care to the women that statistically already do that when Planned Parenthood doesn't. It's a misnomer to assume that Planned Parenthood is helping all these people on breast exams and pap smears and all these things, when in fact the majority of their services aren't even that. If we really want to help women, let's put the money into the places that actually are offering that. Now, you tried to turn my point about private organizations by saying that if private organizations fund Planned Parenthood, that would be, they could do it just for the purposes of abortions. And I'm going to take a very libertarian stance on this and simply say, okay, well, that's their choice. The difference is we remove the federal government's involvement on this issue, because that's ultimately the problem, which is that the federal government is taking taxpayer dollars and forcing it to other organizations.
Okay, first thing. So the first thing is to say they don't have a right to funds. Okay, but that you also have to have a good reason not to fund them, because we agree that the other things they do, and again, please link me this institute in your last 3 minutes, because really I couldn't find them anywhere. I don't believe you when you say that Planned Parenthood doesn't offer any mammograms. There are plenty of websites online which says they do, and you can talk about false digits all day. We're living in fucking post-truth or whatever. So they do provide some amount of other services, right? Because only 300,000 abortions a year, they do lots more than that. So they get funding for the other things, and the Hyde Amendment ensures that the money only goes to those other things. You have to have a good reason not to fund them, right? And if what you're worried about, if the end goal of your reason is to stop abortions, then the law you pass to interfere with Planned Parenthood should be guaranteed to actually reduce the amount of abortions. And this doesn't, because as you said, you're libertarian. All of the funding they've got to do with abortions is coming to them anyway. So the goal you have set is reduce abortions, and the idea you have done is reduce funding, even though they don't connect. You have not achieved your goal even one iota doing this. Second thing I'm going to address is, and then the government overreaches with that, right? Because you're essentially financially coercing people out of their rights, which you don't seem to want to fight. Okay, so giving the funds to other organizations, federally qualified ones. I'm going to advocate very strongly here. It is better to have lots of different organizations than one big one. And the reason for that is that otherwise you get, for example, DMV style queues, you get vast inefficiencies. And another good reason is that often when they're purely government run with all government employees, there's a lot of bureaucracy and a lot more paperwork and things like that. Where, if you're a libertarian, the government sucks at everything. So it would be weird for you to say that the government should run it themselves. And then the second thing here is that also if there's multiple organizations, they can hold each other accountable for things like services and price. So if one, for example, starts to slack off, or starts to place too many impositions on customers getting services, if the other one doesn't do that, then the customers flow there, and it means that having multiples of them keep each other in check. It is if you like a free market, a libertarian solution to the healthcare problem. So it is better to have multiple organizations, and you haven't really given me any reasoning to why these other organizations would be better. As I've already told you, why Planned Parenthood good. It's everywhere already. It is a recognized name. It is exactly the sort of organization you want. Some which is recognizable, which is already in a lot of places. Think about all of that wasted infrastructure which you lose by just reinvesting in other places. The last thing as well is that you were talking about it's a stepping stone to getting rid of abortion. Here is the problem with stepping stones. The problem with a stepping stone solution is that it presupposes that you've actually won the democratic conversation at the end, and you haven't. Right? That is why you need to change the law down, not make it harder and harder for people to follow things which are legal, and then at the end hope that they give up their rights. Because people will still do things like backyard abortions. The demand for abortion still exists. You need to actually win the democratic conversation first.
Okay. So you asked me about linking to the study and everything. It's actually from Planned Parenthood's own annual report. The only study that I was referencing other than that was simply the total numbers of mammograms and pap smears and things out in society. It's by the Guttmacher Institute as well as the Charlotte Lozier Institute, have both studied how many total organizations in the country provide these things. Planned Parenthood's own numbers, you can take a look at how many they offer, and then you can calculate off of that, and it's a very low percentage of the actual amount of women's health things that are provided. Now, you stated that I'm not actually achieving my goals. Well, there are multiple goals here. And you even notice this at the end too. There are multiple goals, but the main goal of my case is to have the United States federal government stop supporting an entity that provides abortions, because we even have in the Hyde Amendment, which he already says that that's already the goal, is not to provide for organizations that are providing abortions. The goal should be to provide for women's health. And the best way to do that is to focus on different organizations, federally qualified healthcare places. These are organizations that outnumber Planned Parenthood 20 to 1. You talk about infrastructure. The infrastructure is there. It's better than at Planned Parenthood. We should be focusing on that. They provide localized service. It is better. They provide more of a focus on actual exams, on pap smears, on women's health issues, rather than specifically focusing on abortion. That's the difference here. It is not that I want to, with this case, it's not that we're trying to stop abortion. It's that we're trying to provide the best solution for where U.S. taxpayer funds are distributed. Now, you talked about how lots of different organizations is better, and you had a whole lot of analysis into this. I absolutely agree. That's the whole point of my case, which is that we don't want to have it all sent to this corporate conglomerate of Planned Parenthood. We should send it to localized organizations, federally qualified to offer these services, who offer these services on a local standard, who know the people, who could provide better care, and who, as you pointed out, all the advantages of multiple different organizations working amongst themselves. That is a much better way to do this. And you provided you did provide one reason that we should still provide to Planned Parenthood, which was that Planned Parenthood is recognizable and they have an infrastructure because they're a corporation essentially. And while this is helpful in some ways, it would be offset by the advantages of having all this money redistributed to the healthcare centers that by far outnumber it, 20 to 1 on federally recognized healthcare centers versus Planned Parenthood. And you talk about a stepping stone. Well, it's not necessarily that the stepping stone is necessary. That's not the point of my case. The point of my case is we need to stop having the federal government support organizations that provide abortion. The United States government has already recognized that with the Hyde Amendment.
Okay. First thing about is Planned Parenthood, how many abortions they provide. They provide, so you use their statistics, I'll use theirs as well. 9.5 million services a year, 300,000 of which are abortions, which means that is 9.2 million services, right, which are not abortion. Your only early response is to say, they count giving out a condom as a service. Well, that is just a way of rhetorically diminishing something which is very important. Having access to things like a condom means that is sex which does not result in a baby, which an unwanted baby, probably one which will result in an abortion. So the things they are doing, these discrete services, you can belittle their numbers by saying Planned Parenthood compared to every other organization combined, right? Like they are 1 in 20 of all health providers. That doesn't mean that they're not providing a hell of a lot of services to a hell of a lot of people, which prevent the exact problem that you want. Too many unwanted babies, too many women who are doing abortions, whether it's through Planned Parenthood or through other means like backyard coat hanger abortions. So the services, which are the vast majority of what they do, which you agree are valuable, are being provided by Planned Parenthood existingly. The second thing you said was that, you want the funding to go towards other organizations. Well, the first thing is that there is no analysis you've given as to why organizations are better aside from rhetorical things like localized services. Is the Planned Parenthood, which is in your local area, not local just because it's part of a broader thing? That's nonsense. It is local. The people who work there live in your town. It is in your proximity. For all intents and purposes, it's local. Your other federally ones are also by the same standard not local because they're also part of big umbrella groups. There's nothing more local about having an organization which is not called Planned Parenthood. The other one you said is it had more of a focus on other things. What does that even mean? Is it your proposition that when people go into Planned Parenthood for a condom, they say, by the way, do you also want an abortion? No, of course they don't do that. They just provide the services which they want. So for the people who go for all of the other things, it is just as focused on their needs as it would be otherwise. So they aren't more focused on other things. This is just rhetorical nonsense with no real analysis. What I told you is that just even redistributing the queues, right? Just the people who line up for services, taking them from Planned Parenthood buildings and then stacking them up to everything else is going to make it much harder. People have limited time off work. People don't want to wait in queue forever for things. We've seen how bad the government is at running these things. If we want to do ones which have to go through the hoops of federally qualified and go through all of that bureaucratic red tape, that is what is going to make it harder for women to access services, and many of them won't at all. The next thing you said is that, look, the government shouldn't be trying to entrench like a monopoly or something, right, by sending all of the money to Planned Parenthood. That is not a case for defunding Planned Parenthood. That is a case for giving more money to other organizations, which doesn't have to come at the expense of the first one. But secondly, your earlier point was that Planned Parenthood is 1 in 20 of all health providers. So clearly this funding isn't creating a monopoly, which you're afraid of. Otherwise, your initial point was a lie. Lastly, the stepping stone argument, again, is anti-democratic, which you have not addressed.
All right. It's simply a question of where do we want the money going? And I would say localized centers, because these provide localized care and they do not